Hey, welcome to Tasting with CrossKeys Vineyards. I am Steve, the winemaker here, and this week we're tasting our Merlots. And I'd like to start off with a big thank you to everybody that's participating today. We've had an amazing response from this, and we're really excited that we've been able to maintain our engagement through this difficult time. So I think with all of your support, we're going to make this a regular thing going into the future, regardless of what happens. So we're really excited, and hopefully you guys are interested, and we can keep coming up with some things that can help you learn a little bit more about what we do here at CrossKeys. Before we get started, first things are this week we have partnered with the Buttercream Dream bakery, local bakery here, for a special a bottle of wine and 2 cupcakes. So please check our website out for that. And this weekend our bistro is staying open till 7:30 and check out the website and our social media for specials. So you can order all the way up till 7:30 and have a nice meal provided by CrossKeys Vineyards. For Mother's Day, of course. I got flowers for my wife for Mother's Day, so it's kind of the guarantee, isn't it? The other thing is we're extending the free shipping until next Friday at the minimum, so we'll see how things work out from there. And please stay tuned to our website and our social media for an announcement on reopening. Obviously, we're going to follow the guidelines put out by the state, but we're hoping that with all the space we have here, we can get up and running and have you guys come visit our beautiful property shortly. All right. Well, so with a friend of mine who makes wine, we used to talk about trying to document every decision that we made that went into a bottle of wine to see what that final count would be. Because the over-under on it was 1,000. I think there's at least 1,000 decisions in every bottle of wine. And so rather than just taste these wines, we selected these 3 because they're very similar vintages. You guys remember the 2011 that we had with the Petit Verdot. 2011 was an interesting vintage here because of the frost that we had in 2010, and then a very good vintage led to some overcropping in other blocks. Merlot is a very consistent producer for us here, so Merlot in 2011 does not reflect any of those issues. It tends to, we can have some trouble with it during the winter time, but for the most part, it's a very even producer. And then 2014 being a good vintage and 2016 being a good vintage. These are 3 standards that I think really signify what we do with Merlot here. And I think what's interesting is that we're going to taste leftovers here. And I know that sounds, maybe not like the best sales job for a bottle of wine. But the reason that I say that is because Merlot is really the backbone of our meritage. We don't grow very much of it. Only there's 2 acres. It's our eastern side of block 7. We don't get a whole lot of fruit off of it, but it is the core of our meritage. So we pick, ferment, process. Everything that we do with Merlot is in goal for producing meritage. And so when I say leftover, it's not so much that this is wine that we don't care about. It's actually one of the wines that we care the absolute most about, and the core of it goes to blend into meritage. And then if we're lucky enough to have any leftovers after that meritage blending, just based on the volumes that we're trying to make and how it plays with others, that's when we make bottle vintage Merlot. So here we're tasting wines that are left out of the meritage process, but they are made to be the absolute core, the essence, the very backbone of our flagship wine here at CrossKeys Vineyards. So going back to that decision making, what we're going to find with this wine is a Merlot that is made for structure. What we're looking for, like I said, is backbone. And we mean that both in color, in flavor, in structure. All of the components of the wine, we want it to really be, even if it's not a majority of the meritage wine, we want it to be the star of that show. This is the wine that we build everything else around. So it's exciting to taste it in its varietal form to see how we try to achieve that. So I'd say in the vineyard, when we the very first thing we think about when it actually is time for growing season, we're kind of through the iffy season that we're having right now. We think about crop loads, and really how we do that with Merlot, because we have vines of different ages in that block. It's a bit of a scattered block. There's different clones in there. We try to assess each vine individually. So we take a look at the shoot growth, how vigorous the vine is growing, and determine the crop based on that. So the rule of thumb we use is called 2-1 none. So we have a vine that grows up with a trunk, we have cordons that go across on the wire, and off of the cordon comes our, call it 16 shoots that hold all the fruit. Every time we have a shoot that is the size of a finger, we'll leave one cluster on it. If it's smaller than that, we'll cut all the clusters off of it to try to bring balance into that vine. And if it's bigger than your finger, then we'll leave, well, more like a pencil. So about pencil size is where we make the decision. So if it's the size of a pencil, we'll leave a cluster on it. If it's smaller than a pencil, smaller diameter, we'll cut all the clusters off. And if it's bigger, we'll leave 2 clusters on. We never leave 3 clusters. Merlot's not crazy about giving you 3 clusters. It has happened, but for the most part, each shoot will produce 2 clusters, and then based on how vigorously that vine is growing, how much leaf area we're gonna get, how big the canopy is, how much sugar we can ripen with those leaves, we make the decision on the fruit. So it's not a block where I even go out and count clusters per panel, clusters per vine, and try to estimate how much fruit we're gonna get off of the block. We really, because we're making it as that core of our meritage, it is literally a decision based on what the vines can support. So if it's a little bit of a weaker year, a slower start, there's a chance that we're not going to carry as much fruit, but I'm not going to try to force more fruit out of that vineyard block than it's willing to give us for the optimal ripeness that we're looking for. The other thing we look in Merlot is really cleanliness of the fruit. So we do a pretty aggressive leaf picking. It's one of our very first vineyard blocks that will get leafed, and that is this first 6 inches of those shoots, 6 to 8 inches, we'll go through by hand and pull off every single leaf below that layer. We typically only do that on the morning side because this, when the sun is setting in the west, it's a little bit more intense, and there's a chance that it will cause sunburn. Grapes will get sunburned just like you do. So we make sure we do it on the morning side to get plenty of airflow and light exposure. And then on the western side, the hotter side, we'll go through and make sure that we give all of the clusters a hat. So we'll remove the leaves that are extra or kind of preventing air from flowing around the grapes. But any leaf that provides a nice hat for the top of the cluster, we're going to leave on that western side. And that really sets us up for good light exposure, good ripening, and good disease management, because air is allowed to flow through those clusters. Air, wind, low humidity, that is the key for healthy fruit. So we really focus on that, and then the added benefit of it is that sunlight exposure helps metabolize pyrazines, which are the green pepper flavors that grapes can develop, and it also helps just with ripeness in general, both in the sugar side, the skin side, and also can help tame the acids a little bit. So let's, I guess, taste the first wine before we kind of move on to the picking decisions that we make for Merlot. So like I said, 2011, good year for Merlot, good year for our Meritage. Exceptional growing year. The only issues we had were Petit Verdot, Cab Franc, maybe a little overcropped, but that wasn't the case for Merlot. And then I think one thing you'll notice about the aroma that kind of jumps out at me at first is the amount of oak on this wine. It's still no more than 40% new oak for all of these wines. So they're still in that 30 to 40% new oak range, but Merlot tends to exhibit that oak a little bit more, and they complement each other. I kind of like the way it acts with this wine. If we were making a different style of Merlot, I would think about the amount of oak that we have. but we really do concentrate some of our brand new oak barrels onto the Merlot program to once again help build that backbone. And what I get from that on this wine is, on the 2011, I remember, this is the funny thing about smell. Everybody lives in their own smell world, and every time that you smell something, it really can take you back to a moment. The smell and memory is very intense. So I remember when I was probably 7 years old, we built a pergola on our house, and I remember the smell of that fresh cut wood very intensely. It was kind of the first time I ever smelled that. And you can still kind of get it if you're walking through a neighborhood where a new house is being built. You'll kind of catch that fresh hewn wood on the breeze sometimes. So I get a little bit of that, and that makes me think that I can kind of think that this is probably Sauvignon Morel cooperage. That's an aroma that I get with those barrels specifically. And then also talking about very specific memories with smell. For me, Merlot has always had the telltale smell of a brand of cherry cinnamon yogurt. It's not so much the yogurt part, but the spices they use for the cherry cinnamon, for me, that I can almost always pick out Merlot just based on that memory, that very strong association I have with the cherry and cinnamon. And one thing, another decision or kind of consequence of the decisions that we make is how long the wine spends inside tank. We call that batting time. Merlot here does not get, it gets ripe, but it does not get really above 22 to 23 bricks, which is good for making wine, but it means that the yeast can ferment all of the sugar. Bricks is a measurement of sugar in a solution. It means the yeast can ferment that sugar relatively quickly. So all of these wines were only in tank in primary fermentation for 7 to 8 days. As a consequence of that, we have to work really, really hard to extract the wine. And when we say extraction, we're trying to get the flavors from the skins into the wine. So with all of these wines, they were punched down 4 times a day. So literally every 6 hours, regardless of the time, starting 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock at night, we were punching down the tanks. So even though we're in the tank for a relatively short amount of time, we really have to make the most of it. And the result of that, you have to be careful with in a wine like Petit Verdot, where you can get really grainy tannins. But wines like Cab Sauv and Merlot here, you extract those tannins and they're very fine textured, especially if you get it ripe. And it's a wonderful mouth-filling tannin. So I wouldn't call it really bitter at all. There's definitely texture to the wine, but it has a wonderful amount of volume that we get from that really intense extraction when we're in fermentation. And then it has the telltale, I hope, the CrossKeys signature of acidity. We are able to maintain acidity by picking at that 22 to 23 bricks, sometimes 21 to 23, anywhere in there. About that 22 bricks is the sweet spot. We look for this wine to go into meritage, to be ageable, and as part of that, we really count on acidity. So we want to bring it low enough in the vineyard that it gets ripe and it's not too piquant, as it were, but we want to maintain a strong acidity in the wine, and that helps us blend in some of our lower acid wines, like a Cabernet Franc sometimes can be lacking in acidity, and we can still build a nice meritage based on kind of that structure, that acidic backbone that Merlot provides. So after we have kind of gotten into the growing season, the shoots are up, the canopy's full, we have the right amount of crop out on the vineyard, the next thing that we start thinking about is ripening. And the very first stage of that, it usually happens in August, and it's called veraison. That's when the grapes start to turn from green to purple, or if it's a white grape, it'll turn from green to gold. But that's kind of the vine signaling that the seeds are now mature. They can be planted and create a new grapevine. That's a whole separate category, but point being, the vine thinks that birds should come and eat all of the grapes and spread the seeds around. So the very first thing we do is put nets up around the fruit to keep the birds from eating all of our grapes. We're still going to be at least a month, almost 2 months away from harvest at that point, but that's the very first stage of ripening. And what we do at that point is go through the vineyard and check if there's any clusters that are still green or pink when most of the clusters are still red, and we'll go ahead and cut those off. So even if it's on a strong shoot, even if we think the vine can support it, at that point we know that there are clusters that are falling behind in ripeness. We want nice even ripeness. We want to develop all the flavors we can. We want to make sure we don't pick any fruit that has a strong pyrazine flavor to it, the green bell pepper flavor to it. So we'll go back through that vineyard, usually right before the nets go up, and cut off anything that's falling behind in ripeness. Why that happens, I wish I could tell you. I don't know. All I can do is cut the underripe fruit off. But at that point, we're kind of left with the clusters that we know we're going to pick. They seem to all be ripening at the same rate. And usually when they get to about 20 bricks, 19 to 20 bricks, it comes down to tasting. We don't really pick on chemical parameters, e.g. the amount of sugar or acidity in a grape. Sometimes you're forced to, you know, if one of those chemical parameters is getting so far out of balance that you know, you're going to make a bad wine if you don't pick it before you drop below a certain threshold, then we will pick based on chemistry. But in a good vintage like these, what we'll do is start tasting the berries. The first thing we'll look for is the skin flavor. So we'll chew up the skins, separate it from the pulp. You know, it's very important to be consistent. So I chew 15 times in the right side of my mouth, 15 times on the left side of my mouth, and then I evaluate the texture of that skin. So we're looking for it to not taste like paper. Really, you find that with a lot of grape skins, it'll taste papery. You know the grape's not ready at that point. But if it doesn't taste papery, it tastes good, then we start looking at the texture of those skins. We want those skins to start becoming soft, turn into a paste in the mouth, and then also have good flavors, and make sure that there's not that excessive bitterness that we get from underripe tannins. So we'll evaluate the skins. We'll take a look at the pulp itself. As soon as that pulp is nice and clear, it's no longer hazy or green or anything like that, we know that the pulp is ready to be picked, and then finally we'll evaluate seeds. Now, based on what we do for Merlot, we typically don't count on seed tannins providing a lot of the flavor and structure of the wine, because we like to pick it when the acidity is still present in that grape. We don't want it to hang so long that we develop ripe skin or ripe seeds, but we lose all of that vibrant acidity that we count on from Merlot. But we will make sure that they're not tinny. Sometimes the seeds can really taste like aspirin. We want to make sure those negative notes are gone. But if they're still a little green, still a little underripe, we're not worried about it, because, like I said, these wines, typically Merlot only spends about 7 days in the tank. There's not enough time with alcohol to extract any green tannins that we get from those seeds. So next, we'll taste the 2014. And this is an interesting, you know, kind of journey through time. I'd say these vintages are pretty comparable for Merlot here. And first thing I notice is a different cooperage. So this, for me, is more vanilla, toasted marshmallow. It's a sweeter oak, which I really enjoy. I think that fresh hewn wood can be really nice in Petit Verdot. It can be really nice in the blend as well. But when we're looking for Merlot, we're looking for Meritage. We want sweet flavors. We want the kind of the richness, that fruitiness, and vanilla is a great complement to it. And then this one is more black cherry. It's a little darker in you know, fruit composition on the aroma. So my first instinct here would be to say maybe the acidity is a little bit low on the 2014, but let's confirm. Maybe slightly lower, but it really still has a very ageable, it's put together in a very ageable way. So I don't think it's lacking acidity. It's really nice. I'd say it's definitely a very good standalone wine. I think 2011 is very age-worthy. 2014 obviously is holding up to age wonderfully, still has great fruit aromatics, but I would say probably the 14 is going to fall off before that 11 does, just based on the acidity and tannins that I'm tasting in it. And still has that signature Merlot aroma as well, but for being in the Shenandoah Valley, this 2014 does not show any reflection of a cold climate Merlot. It is still pretty jammy. It's actually very, very nice. And it's wonderful to see Merlot that I know was really heavily extracted for 7 days, to the point where you really risk over extraction on certain wines, but Merlot, it seems like we've really kind of dialed in what we like from our Merlot. Not a lot of time in tank, but when it's in tank, man, you work for it. You need to be sweating on this wine at least 6 times a day, or at least 4 times a day. So then let's talk about processing. Merlot, we pick it typically is one of our earliest reds. It buds out before anything else. So it starts to grow before anything else, and as a consequence, it'll go through veraison a little bit faster than everything else. Other than Pinot is usually our first red to go through. Sometimes the Cab Franc, but Merlot is right in that early section. So we're tasting, we're evaluating the skins. I'd probably say 30% of my diet comes from grapes during the month of September. It's really tasting every single block. My son also absolutely loves to eat grapes. Not really to evaluate them, just to kind of reduce our volumes. It seems to be his motivation. So he really enjoys eating the grapes. But once we've decided that we've hit those parameters, we're really looking for, like I said, good flavors, good skin tannins, clear pulp. We're ready to pick the thing. We know that we got 7 days in tank. We can get those good flavors out. We'll pick it all by hand, pick it into our little yellow lugs, bring it into the winery as quickly as possible. Usually we dedicate an entire day for Merlot picking. It tends to fall kind of on its own anyways, but the other consequence of that is that we can get from the field, usually by 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, all that Merlot can be in, we can cool it, and as soon as it gets cool, we'll start to process it. It's really important with Merlot that we remove all the leaves. Sometimes we'll do that by actually raising the nets for a day before we pick out any leaves that are still inside of the canopy, and make sure that when we're actually picking those grapes, nothing will fall into the lugs that will give us any green flavors. You can get a green tea note out of a Merlot, the vegetal parts of a Merlot, which isn't the end of the world, but that's really not what we're looking for. So for us, it is anything that's not a grape. In the wine world, we call that MOG, material other than grape. We don't want to let any of that through. In certain wines, stem pieces are not the end of the world. They can actually add to the texture. We're not looking for that. We want pure Merlot skin tannin. We don't want anything coming from the rachis or the stem of the grapes. The way we do that is, like I said, we'll make sure there's no leaves in the picking zone when we start. We'll have one person dedicated to picking leaves out of the boxes, out of the lugs as we pick. We'll get them in, cool down as quickly as possible, and then we run it through our distemmer. And this is one of the first times that we deal with ripe red fruit through our distemmer. So, if we bring in 3 tons of Merlot, we have it's called the Dream. We have a wonderful distemmer that does a great job sorting out MOG, material other than grape, but we haven't really calibrated it in yet. So if you're ever here on Merlot processing day, we'll spend half an hour on the first 100 pounds of Merlot trying to dial in the settings and make sure that we get as much of that material other than grape out of the grapes. And then kind of once we get it dialed, then we'll finish it in the next half hour. So we can do 100 pounds in half an hour, and then do 2,000 or 6,000 pounds in the next half an hour. So for us, it's really about trying to make sure that we get the cleanest fruit out possible. Another thing that we do with Merlot, because we know it's going to be in the tank for a short amount of time, we'll actually crush these grapes. So we'll send the grapes dumped onto our conveyor belt, our elevator that'll drop it into our destemmer. The destemmer will take the berries off of the rachis, off the stem, and at that point I can actually dial which berries fall off, which stay on. Anything that's still green we can keep to stay on the rachis. Anything that's a little overripe we can keep off the rachis, and then it'll sort out any small berries which tend to be underripe, and then we start selecting the good berries while the material other than grape gets sorted out as well. Typically with some of our higher tannic wines, that's the end of the processing. It'll go straight to tank at that point. With Merlot, because we're really looking for that skin tannin, after it comes off the destemmer, we'll send it through a crusher. And it's literally just two rubber rollers that rotate, that spin counter to each other. And we can set that gap just enough so when the berries fall through that crusher, they get popped open. We don't want to mash them up. All we're trying to do is just break the skin, because we want the edge of that skin exposed for extraction. So as we punch it down, as we're in the tank really trying to get extraction from it, we can get more surface area of that skin, because we're looking for skin flavors on Merlot. At that point it goes in the tank. We'll inoculate it. Typically, like I said, Merlot is such an important part of what we do here. We don't mess a whole lot with native fermentations on Merlot. We want a very consistent product. So we have found like RC212 sometimes works pretty well for us. We have a couple different yeasts that we might use based on the vintage. FX10 tends to do pretty well on it, but we're trying to balance a yeast that is quite vigorous. We want to be done in 7 days, but we don't want it to go so fast that we miss that window of extraction. So based on the sugar levels, we'll decide the level of vigorousness that we want from the yeast. At that point, we start punching it down. We'll punch it down as soon as it's in the tank, we'll punch it down, and then for every 6 hours after that, that wine will be punched down continuously for the next week. So 2016. It's funny, for me the oak profile is in between the first two. I forgot to look up which barrels are in this, but I know for sure that it's mostly Dargaux, which is a very consistent barrel for us. It usually has nice vanilla. This has a little bit of that sawdust, fresh wood note to it, which I don't usually associate with it, so maybe there was a Según Morale in there as well. Typically those two coopers make up 60%, 40 to 60% of our cooperage. They're very consistent, and we kind of know what they give us. But as I smell it again, I get definitely more of those toasted notes. They're that toasted caramel and still that cinnamon.
What does the term punch down mean?
So punch down. So if you were to make a mimosa, I think if you're all tasting this, you guys know what mimosas are. You probably had a few. So you think about, you put in your full pulp orange juice, you pour in your champagne, all of that pulp will rise to the top, right? Or if you put like a raspberry or something in your mimosa or Bellini, it'll rise to the top. The exact same thing happens in a tank full of grapes that's fermenting. So all of the solids in that tank will kind of condense together and then float to the top. We call that the cap. And that typically is the hottest part of the tank as well. So, and then all the wine below it will be colder and not in contact with those solids. And you remember me being so adamant that we get those skin flavors into this wine. If all that skin's floating at the top, we've got to constantly mix that tank. So it is literally, for us, we do it manually. They make machines that make it easier, with air power or whatever, but you never quite get the control that you get except by doing it by hand. So it is a big stainless steel stick with a round stainless steel plate on the end, and we get onto the catwalk and we punch a hole in that cap, and then we slowly start mixing up that tank. When we start, it is incredibly difficult. The wine is pretty homogeneous at that point, so it's great from top to bottom, and it is working that punch down tool. You can definitely build up a sweat. It is shoulder central when you're doing punch downs. As it moves on, it gets a little easier. It's a little bit more liquid. There's not as much juice inside that pulp anymore, but it's still quite the process. And so all we're doing is literally mixing it up with a big metal stick. It's a very traditional, ancient way of getting extraction out of the wine. We will do punch down or pump overs as well. That's when we draw wine from the bottom and then pump it over the top of that cap. If we need to incorporate oxygen, we'll do that. We also have a technique called delistage, and that's kind of made at the moment if we think the wine needs it. Typically, so delistage is French for rack and return. We use that term a lot of times, but specifically delistage is draining all the wine out of the tank, pumping it into a fresh, clean tank somewhere else, letting the grapes sit, and then we'll pump the wine back on top of the cap, because the cap will have sat on the bottom of the tank, and we'll pump it on like a fire hose and really break it up. Some wines, if you read about delistage, people will say delistage helps reduce extraction, because some wines, they'll take the wine away and actually leave it in a different tank for multiple hours in order to reduce the amount of contact time that wine has with the grapes. We don't do that. We see delistage as an enhanced extraction technique. We take the wine out and we put it right back in. And the reason we do that is because as that cap is floating, all the pressure on it is coming from the bottom. So it'll develop channels and cracks and clumps based on it always floating. And what we find is when we do a delistage, that cap now is sitting with gravity on the bottom of the tank, and new cracks will open, and it helps break up those clumps in a new way, so there's not some section of grapes somewhere in that cap that hasn't gotten its flavor out of it yet. So we take the wine out as fast as we can, and we pump it in back as fast as we can. That's one of the most satisfying things you do during extraction, is filling that tank back up, because we'll have a 4-ton fermenter. Usually, it's almost to the brim. We'll drain it until there's just about, 1.5 foot of cap sitting on the bottom of the tank. And then as fast as you can get that pump to run, we just try to beat it up and really crack open that cap in new and fresh ways.
How worried are you about the freezing this weekend and needing the windmills? Extremely
worried. Yeah. We're going to throw everything we've got at it. So we have with the upcoming cold temperatures, we're worried that tonight is going to be not necessarily a temperature inversion. I think we'll probably have the wind die down and we'll be able to help with wind machines, so we're going to try to use them as much as we can. But that's going to be an hour by hour decision. The other thing we do is we have a fertilizer spray. It's a potassium-based fertilizer that we put out into the vineyard, and it acts as a cryoprotectant. So it's kind of like antifreeze inside the wine. It's not actually antifreeze, but that's how it works. It kind of lowers the freezing point of all the liquid inside the wine. We're doing that, and we're also going to light some fires. We're going to throw out everything we've got. 2 nights in a row is going to be tough for us, but I'll be here. Please send warm thoughts. We need them. So back to the 2016. Now that it's kind of been in the glass a little bit longer, I get a lot more of that jammy fruit. The wood that I'm smelling is not nearly as fresh. It definitely seems more toasted and rounded. So 2016 shares kind of the same acid profiles as 2014. In good vintages, it's funny that Chardonnay tends to be the #1 offender of this, but Merlot can follow it as well. We get really addicted to sugar numbers, right? Just the honest truth is, you try to hit a really good sugar number so we can pretend that we're California or something like that. And what's funny is, as soon as we're done picking it, and we have it in the tank, and we measure the acidity and the sugar and all the things that we care about in wine,
sometimes we'll think, oh, that was the wrong choice. We focus too much on the one parameter instead of the other. So I always have to watch myself with Chardonnay, especially, to maintain that acidity. I think 2016 is not lacking in acidity, but it's a wine that I would probably want a little bit more acidity out of. It's very drinkable right now, but we'll see. And I don't know if it has quite the decade on it like the 2011 has. So when I say that we don't pick on numbers, sometimes we can't help ourselves because we're always impressed with our numbers, and it lets us brag to our other winemakers. But it is really important with Merlot that you pick it for what you're trying to make out of it. And I think the 2016, like I said, is good. I think probably it was a little heavier Petit Verdot vintage for that Meritage, because Petit Verdot always carries a little higher acidity. But this makes a more drinkable wine right now, but that's not necessarily what we're looking for with Merlot. We really care about acidity in Petit Verdot. We want to make sure that we get it down enough that we can make a drinkable wine within the next 2 or 3 years. Merlot is an aging wine. This is a wine built for time. And so I'm a little concerned that 2016 might not be great in 2026. I could be wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong, but hopefully you guys drink it all before we even get to that point anyways. So I think it's definitely good for 5 years anyways, but all of our wines are built for some age. 3 years is kind of when we see them peaking, and then 7 years, we have yet to have a wine that really falls apart before 7 years. But to get to that decade mark, the 2011 here is at 9 years. You gotta have that acidity to carry it. That said, the 14 is still holding up nicely, so it's kind of right now still in its sweet spot. But the 16 is wonderful right now. And there's just that wonderful, for me, I guess Merlot is a memory wine. I smell it and I have memories. So it's very comfortable wine. It's a nice wine to drink with food. But at the same time, I think you can appreciate it. There's lots of complexity. It's one of the 5 Bordeaux grapes. It's one of the major, grape plantings in the entire world. And there's a reason why, because there's a lot to appreciate from aroma, texture, flavor. It's kind of the whole package. It doesn't necessarily need to be blended. So after those 7 days in tank, then we press the wine. We'll drain off all the free run. So anything that comes out of the tank naturally, we call that free run. That'll be put in the tank, settled, and barreled down separately. And then when we press the wine, all the leftover solids, there's still liquid inside of them. That's the moment when we load them in the press. We'll start pressing it, and at every single pressure that wine comes out of that press, I sit there with a wine glass and I taste it. And I'm looking for the wine to get weaker. Typically, I look for those tea leaf notes. Sometimes, based on what the wine, the free run wine is like, I'll take the tea notes, but it's kind of a game day decision as we're pressing the wine. But really, I'm looking for, as the wine gets weaker, if the wine gets bitter, if there's a flavor I don't like, I don't care how much volume has come out of the press, we stop the press, we're done. And that wine, depending on its quality, if I think it's just as good as the free run, we'll blend it in. If it's got a little too much bitterness that I think will age out, but I'm not sure, we'll age it separately. So we'll end up with free run and press wine, and then put them in a barrel. Typically we go a little heavier on the new oak, 40% or so on the Merlot, so it can give us some options for blending into the Meritage later, or if we're building the Merlot separately. We don't want to take all the new oak. If we're going to make a Merlot, we don't want to put all the new oak in the Meritage. We want to make sure there's some good new oak in our regular Merlot wine as well. So it gets a kind of a double dose of new oak, but that'll be split between 2 wines. And then the key is forgetting about it. For 4 months at least, I tried to pretend I don't remember anything about Merlot, and then usually around February, March, April, somewhere in there, we'll start tasting the wines again and take a fresh look. And it's funny because sometimes there's pressed wine in a barrel that you weren't crazy about going in, but all of your concerns are alleviated. There's nothing to worry about. Sometimes there's pressed wine that you thought was pretty good and probably just blend, but no way, it ain't gonna make it. So
We try to keep all the barrels separate on Merlot, make sure that there's no, we want all of the barrels to kind of act as their own individual vessels, make selections based on what's best for Meritage, what's best for Merlot, and blend from there. So it kind of gets treated, even though it's one of our smallest lots, it gets treated in the same way that something that has 3 different fermentations does, even though it's usually fermented as one. I'm sure I overwhelmed you with information today. And that was probably only 100 of the 1,000 decisions that we make. But I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned a little something. And please, like I said, if you guys have any questions, please send them in, and I'd be happy to answer them. Once again, thank you guys so much for all the amazing uptake on this. We really appreciate all of you guys joining us. I'm glad that somebody likes to hear me talk about wine so much. My wife can't stand it. I do it too much, but hopefully I don't scare you guys off on it. We're going to do another tasting in 2 weeks with 3 bottles in 2 weeks. So with the free shipping until next Friday, please order them now. We're so happy you guys are participating. I convinced the powers that be that we're going to do some of the special wines in 2 weeks. So some of the, we're going to start with a wine that I kept hidden in secret for a year before we bottled it. It's kind of a surprise wine. I'm very excited that we can now taste it all together. It's one of our first reserve wines. And then we also have the reserve wine from this year, the Viognier, that we can taste together. And then also our port, which, legally I'm not supposed to say port, our port style dessert wine. We're not in Portugal, so we can't say port. So some special wines, some interesting stuff that we do here, things that make us unique, and things that hopefully give you an idea of what I like in a wine, things that I think are special. These are hand selections for me. But next week, I'll be tasting the Nouvelle with you guys, so please order those as well. This is a great sparkling wine for, like I said, it's for celebrating any occasion. Somebody that I know I gave a bottle to said, I asked them if they tasted it yet, and they said, I'm waiting for a special occasion. Please, Nouvelle is a sparkling wine for any occasion. This is definitely, Tuesday, I've had a rough day, drink some bubbles. Secret in the wine industry is winemakers prefer bubbles. If it's got sparkles, we're all in. So if you want to drink like a winemaker, drink bubbly, drink Nouvelle. So hopefully we can enjoy that next week, and we'll give you an update on how everything went this weekend. I really appreciate you guys for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you next week.